Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Kreutz, and this is the Worldwide Technology Tech 37 webinar. Our Tech 37 webinars are a monthly series of webinars focused on a different technology solution and designed to pack a lot of information into a quick 37-minute format so you can continue on about your busy day. The core of the presentation will be within the 37 minutes, so if you need to drop off, you can rest assured you've been given all the pertinent information as promised. Today's webinar will be focused on how modern workspaces can drive innovation. We have a great lineup of WWT panelists, and we'll get to them in just a moment. Among the many items that we'll cover, workspaces and workforce trends. Also, the impact of spaces on innovation and collaboration. We will also cover culture and an agile approach. Just some general housekeeping items before we begin. If at any time during our conversation today you have any questions, be sure to post them to the Q&A window, which is now open. And we'll be sure to address as many of them before the end of the presentation. You can also engage with us on Twitter. You can tweet your questions to us using the @ WWT_INC. Please be sure to use the hashtag Tech37. Now that we've gone over those, let's introduce our moderator, Joe Berger.
Thanks, Brian. Hey, everyone. My name is Joe Berger. I am the Collaboration Practice Manager here for WWT. And I'm excited today for the panel that we do have. This is a very hot topic for us. It's a conversation we get into with a lot of our own customers. And when we meet with other organizations, they always ask about how we are seeing the modern workspace and how it can drive innovation. So with that said, I want to first kick things off by introducing our panel. If you guys don't mind, why don't you tell us who you're with, what do you do, and sort of your role within your organization?
Sure. Brandon Echele. I am the business video practice lead for Worldwide Technology. I handle video conferencing, web conferencing, and video portals. Worldwide, for those who are not familiar with us, is an $8 billion global systems integrator and supply chain provider. We are 4,200 or so employees. We have been on Forbes' list of largest privately owned businesses, and we have been on their top 100 best places to work for the last 5 years.
Dave?
Thanks. I'm Dave Blatt, Business Development Director for WWT Asynchrony Labs. That's a software development application Internet of Things integrator. It's a division of Worldwide. Focus on helping to drive and understand business needs and outcomes and bring the solutions that Worldwide and Asynchrony have to offer.
Perfect. And Dave?
Joe, my name is Dave Lathrop. I'm Director of Applied Research at Steelcase. Steelcase is a maker of products and services that equip office buildings. Our job in research is primarily to study the evolution of the human work experience.
Fantastic. All right, guys, so let's jump into it. So today's topic is all around how the modern workspace can drive innovation. What are some trends that you all are seeing with your own customer base that reinforces this new shift in the way we work? And Brandon, let's start with you.
So some of the new trends that we're seeing are obviously the move toward open workspaces, the move toward collaborative environments. This also brings new tools that are required to meet some of the teaming, the collaboration aspects that groups of people, whether they're local or disparate, require.
Yeah, we're seeing clients that are looking for opportunities to engage their employee base to solve problems faster, innovate, and bring new ideas, and they're doing that by embracing some of the tools, the open space, and the culture that drive innovation.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those, Joe. And I think I'd emphasize the idea that culture and behavior, human behaviors that become the culture of the firm over time, really is the reason to have buildings. The culture of the firm breathes when people are together in the buildings. And I'm seeing more and more clients become acutely aware of how important their culture is to the way their organization performs. And they're thinking about their buildings as a result in different ways.
Now, what are some of the leading factors that are causing these businesses to reevaluate this? It's great knowing that we need a cultural shift, but why is it so important now?
Well, I'll tee off, I think the predominant concern for most organizations today is how to stimulate innovation. We're past the phase in the long wave economic cycles where simple process improvements to gain efficiencies are adequate. So how do you introduce meaningful innovation into a firm that perhaps has been content with doing marginal improvements on things? How do we get the disruptive things that are happening external to the firm to internalize and become disruptive to the innovation process internally? What that really means is stimulating ideation in the minds of individuals, the sort of individual invention of something new, and how do we socialize that into what becomes a meaningful innovation at the organizational level? Innovation is a social phenomenon, and so connecting people together and helping them be successful in moving the new through a system so that innovation can occur.
I think in the service-based economy, it's we work differently, and we need to embrace how the different generations work, and it's a collaborative, team-based approach that is just predominant coming in the future in which folks work and get productivity done.
What's some ways that you found how organizations are better helping to plan for this new shift? I mean, you talked about the socialization. Is that everyone sign up for a Facebook account on the company's website, or how are you seeing people start reacting to this new world?
Well, there are a lot of technology tools that are being implemented to try and bring people together, and that's clearly very important. It's quite natural, of course, to the younger groups in the workforce. It's also the case that if I see you as a person, I have a much higher likelihood of getting to know you than had I not seen you at all. And if I get to know you a little bit, perhaps we'll build some sort of trust between us, which is really when the good things start to happen between people. So seeing, becoming, knowing, leading to trust, which opens up the gateway for human interaction to happen at a deeper level. That's really, I think, one of the things that organizations can do most directly. And it's a lot of what's behind the idea of visually connecting people and buildings.
Do you think most organizations do trust very well right now, or is it hard to build trust?
That's a general question that's a little hard to answer. I would say that power and ego and my idea have been defining sort of masculine principles of the design of organizations for the last several hundred years. I control the value of myself by controlling my ideas. What we're moving into clearly is an era in which the sharing of ideas is the way the actual potential of the organization gets unlocked. And so where in the past controlling to succeed, now maybe is shifting over to sharing to succeed as a dynamic inside of organizations. All sorts of companies are in all sorts of different phases on this. The more aggressive, younger industries are probably better at this than some of the more entrenched industries.
But organizations need to take a conscious effort to think about, okay, how do I foster trust? How do I foster that culture? And this topic of the modern workspace with the tools and the aesthetics that can drive that culture and promote that. Those come together in those kind of spaces.
You've been mentioning some of the newer technology companies and the younger generation. Do you think this shift of the more modern workspace is really geared toward that younger generation, or does it also play with the baby boomers and the Gen Xers that have already been in the workforce for quite some time?
I think it's the case that people, generally speaking, we tend to like what we're familiar with. And for a long time, the workplace had been largely about status and rank, largely about departments. And we sort of assumed that we would come into our firm and we would go a place where our name was on the wall somehow, or perhaps on the door. And that model of place was very closely allied with the organizational design of the industrial organization. So those two things were tightly webbed, and we basically taught people that that's the correct way. Now we're finding that as the dynamics of agile organizations become more commonly spoken about outside of the technology industries, it's clearly the case that taking down some of those barriers that we have put up are part and parcel of helping create organizations that can move more quickly and move towards innovation more successfully. It's not to say, however, that putting everyone in a sea of openness is the correct response. We need to balance this I and we need, and that balance is changing in the sort of character of how it's expressed recently.
So in a recent Forbes article I was reading, and it talks about Generation Z, and Generation Z is this new generation that's starting to graduate from high school. So within the next year or two, Generation Z will start entering the workforce. 45% of the people who respond to this survey said they believe that working with baby boomers is going to be a challenge for them. Reason being, they work and think a little bit differently than necessarily the baby boomers who are about to retire. How are businesses, or how do you think businesses are going to start juggling these different communities, and how do they make sure that they're productive while they're trying to work side by side?
I think some of that comes down to the tools. One of the things that I find interesting is that, especially Generation Z that you're speaking about, is a generation that has grown up with an something their entire lives. So as a child, they were, put in the car seat and given an iPad.
About babysitters, yeah.
Yeah. So, however whether they're good or bad, this is the reality that they have always had some sort of device. So to them, I think there is the idea that work-life balance, or that work ends and then life starts after 5 o'clock, isn't really there any longer. They're looking for a strategy to provide work-life integration. So they want to be able to have that always connected. It's comfortable to them, but going that route can't leave behind the fact that there are still a large amount of employees who do not feel that way. And I think the balance is going to be tough, but it needs to take place, or you're going to lose your ability to retain and attract the younger client or the younger employee.
It has to be a meaningful and conscious effort on part of an organization to treat, the facets, if it's just millennials and the seasoned workforce, to support the way that they work and train a little bit differently.
Now, how do you do a knowledge transfer? Because you've got this generation retiring, that it's not necessarily the content that they own, it's the information that they have, upstairs. How do you train somebody on that information that's learned knowledge? How do you transfer that?
Yeah, there's a knowledge theorist that's commonly quoted, Echele, who talks about explicit and tacit knowledge. Largely what the boom holds in its head is tacit knowledge, meaning it's not codified, it's not written down, it's not fundamentally very searchable. And the way that knowledge transfers is through socialization, transfers through relationships. And so a big idea, I think, for organizations is recognizing that difference, not overly depending upon searchable data, and taking down the barriers between people, not physical barriers only, but that as well, that allow relationships to build. One of the things that I find personally to be most compelling is that this, as we bring younger people in, they're aware of how much they don't know today, probably because they've been so immersed in information all the way along. The uncertainty and complexity of the world outside has dawned on them perhaps much earlier than it did for some previous generations because of the way they've used and been brought up in a stew of information. So they're looking for help at just the time when many of the people in the boom are trying to give some of their ideas to somebody else. And so there's potentially a marriage made in heaven here if we can find ways to forget what we look like and more think about what we know and how we can work together on things. I'm seeing a very interesting confluence of that pattern right now.
And that social interaction is more engaging workforce. They will stay longer. They'll, whether it's a seasoned veteran at an organization or new millennials coming in, you want to attract them and you want that in human engagement.
One other just quick thing to throw on top of this, there's an idea that parallels generation called life stage. And the principle here is that people who are 20 tend to be like people who are 20, regardless of which generation they're part of when they were that age.
Different ideals, but they're still a 20-year-old.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so when you're 20 or 40 or 60, you tend to be thinking about the same things. And that runs kind of as an undercurrent under this. And I think sometimes we forget that that may be even more important. So there's nothing like 2 kids and a mortgage that make people start to think about life in a different way. It makes them more accessible to other people who perhaps have been through that process too. And so there's a natural aging that goes on in this, and it's always been there, nothing to be concerned about, but something to be understood, particularly the time when the information that is about to be lost is tacit.
Now, one of the things you mentioned earlier is around breaking down barriers, both from a physical and more of a personal level. Let's talk about the physical. So one of the things that's been popping up over the past few years is the concept of the open office, right? You know, you're taking down cue walls. Everyone's now having shared spaces and huddle rooms and collaborative areas. What do you see, you know, when you talk to customers, Brandon? What do they care about? Why is open office important to them? And really, what does the open office mean to you and to the customers that you see?
Well, open office means it's kind of like asking, you know, for give me a red car. Well, what do you want that red car to be? What are the things you need in it? So in regards to open office, it's really a broad question. What is an open office to customers? A couple things really need to be taken into account, and that is the type of worker. I mean, it's a very long list, but just up front, the type of worker that is going to be in that space, how many of those workers are going to be there, what type of activities need to be accounted for there. But they're really looking for ways to, from a financial standpoint, put more people into smaller spaces. As real estate prices go up, especially if you look at some of the larger metropolitan areas, such as San Francisco, New York, there needs to be a strategy to provide a space for more people that is less square footage. And that's where the open workspace really started to come from. But it also provides, they want these people, these employees, to be more communicative. They want them to be more collaborative. They want them to be more of a team rather than a bunch of individuals.
Are there any pros or cons that you guys have seen around the open office that some outweigh the others?
Yeah, earlier I mentioned about the engagement and feeling fulfilled at work. It does come from human interaction, whether that is face-to-face in a single office or across using tools to simulate and across different offices. You know, the concept of I and we, finding the right balance. And, you know, if I'm an attorney and have all my papers and having to move all that paper to a hoteling aspect is not very conducive of an open office space, and that can work against you.
And not to mention privacy concerns as well. That's why the type of employee that is going to be in these spaces is so important.
Yeah, I think you guys have all highlighted some really important things. One other thing I would add to this is that within any individual occupational type, so we may think of an engineer as needing a fair amount of concentration, or a developer needing a couple of monitors. These things are all true. And yet within that population, attorneys, engineers, marketing people, we're going to find a broad set of differences as well. Some people are more introverted, some more extroverted. Some people thrive in a sea of chaos. Other people need to be locked away in a little room. And really the answer to this, I think, is to think of our offices more like we think about our homes, where when you go home, you sort of have access to the whole thing to use as you need to. And why don't we think about our offices that way? Rather than sort of the model where I come in the front door and I go to a place where my name is on it that I own, maybe the right way is to say I own the whole thing. And where is it good for me to be now, given who I need to be with, what I need to be doing, and who I am as a person? Yeah. That model is kind of the evolving whole, I think, that allows us to reduce the amount of usable real estate to hit the cost targets that companies are concerned about, but also allows us to capitalize on the investments in the technologies that allow people this fluidity of motion.
Overall, if done right, it's overwhelmingly positive. There's just some great innovation that comes out of it. There's great human interaction that retains employees. There's the cultural aspects of growth in a company and learning. So overall, this open office space, you know, if done right, is phenomenal.
Now, what about those employees who aren't necessarily in the open office with you? I know here we're a global company. A lot of our team members are virtual, either working from home, working in other offices. How do we make sure that we have them engaged? Are there certain tools that you recommend, or technologies or process to make sure that they're included into what we're doing here in our office?
So I think the first one that comes to mind is video. Traditionally, I think from a user perspective, video has always been, there have been some issues with video. One, it was either hard to use or it was too expensive to deploy widespread. The other one is that people, I think, had a propensity to be embarrassed about being on video. They didn't like to be able to, especially if they could see themselves on it. It wasn't something that they were comfortable with. I think today, though, the way that the generational shift has taken place, there's less and less of that embarrassment or that uncomfortable feeling about being on video. You know, just an anecdote. I was speaking with a colleague a couple of months back, and he was traveling. He was in a hotel, and his cell phone had died, and so he called his family from the hotel phone. And the first thing his young daughter said on the other side was, "Hey, Daddy, look at this. Look what I did today at school." And he was telling me that he just realized that his daughter had never used the phone with him that didn't have FaceTime, that didn't have video. That's how comfortable, it was uncomfortable for her to not have a video representation of her father on the phone. So that is really changing. Video is a vital component to distributed workplaces. Yes, you can develop trust just hearing a person's voice, but it's going to take a lot longer to develop that trust. There are a lot more variables that go into, are they really going to do that? Did they really mean that part of it? So there's a lot of those little intricacies that are really lost in audio and text. We think that generation, the newer generations, are really only text. They don't talk on the phone, but video is not something that they're not willing to use.
You know, it's interesting what you pointed out with your friend's daughter. The way she's learning how to learn about information and how she chooses to use it and how she assumes certain things will be with her really for the rest of her life,
right,
much as it is for me and for you. So the way we learn how to learn essentially is how we work.
Right.
And so this is another interesting aspect of bringing new tools into the workplace of whatever kind, spatial or technologic, that are different from what people have become familiar with, and how we engage people in the process of reinventing what work actually looks like is probably one of the things that I think gets neglected most often. We think that people resist change, so we need to help them change. What we really need to do is engage them in the process of defining how the future will be so that it becomes something they're looking for, not working against.
It's incredible just the difference between having an always-on video in a distributed team over multiple offices, just having an always-on video to see who's in the room versus trying to pick up the phone. It's an incredible difference of how you connect. Humans won't pick up the phone to dial the number. They just want to know, hey, are you there? I will more encourage to talk to you if I just know you're there. And we may be in different offices.
So you've mentioned there's different tools, and video being one of them. How important is that actual user experience and the simplicity of it?
I think user experience is probably one of the most important aspects of any collaboration tool. Gallup did a poll a while back that focused on employee engagement. And the results of the poll were that 72% of polled employees actually said they were either disengaged or actively disengaged. So they were actively working against their employer. When it comes to the tools, whether it's IM and presence, whether it's business messaging, whether it's video, if the tool is not easy to use and it's not repeatable, you are doing nothing but adding another reason for someone to become disengaged. If it's hard to talk with their colleague that's not right next to them or down the hall, it's just one more piece that adds to the disgruntled employee. So tools are not going to solve whether someone is engaged or actively disengaged, but it can help prevent people, I think, from becoming actively disengaged.
So how do our customers simplify it then?
Well, I think there's a couple pieces. Simplification, there are two really that I would say. One is going to be repeatability. So it doesn't matter which office I go into, which room I go into, conference room. It doesn't matter if I'm on my home computer or my phone. It needs to be a very similar experience from endpoint to endpoint, device to device, application to application. If I can walk into any building and know how to use it, or if I'm new, if I can walk into any building and a colleague knows how to use it, it is going to provide a much better experience and someone not be, put off by it, because that's the biggest thing. If it doesn't work the first couple times,
Give up.
Well, particularly for people for whom technology is not their native way of communicating.
correct.
We had an expression that we used for a long time as we started to get into this. It was the acronym FUMIFU, which basically said first use must inspire future use. So better to have a device that does one thing in a very simple way that's actually useful to people than the capability that's nearly infinite that I'm so startled by or uncomfortable with room to room or device to device that I won't use at all.
I tell customers all the time, you can have too many options.
Yes.
Having as many options as possible is not necessarily a good thing.
And yet for IT folks, oftentimes that is what the goal is, because they're curious, they know it's possible, they want to offer the broadest possibilities. I just wanted to throw one other thing in that, in addition to the study that you referenced from Gallup, we recently published a global study that shows that there's a correlative relationship between satisfaction with the places people are provided to work in and engagement. It's a direct linear relationship. So if you're dissatisfied with the place you work, you're likely to be dissatisfied with the places in which you work. And the exact opposite is the case as well, globally.
So you've mentioned some of these other tools like instant messaging and video and conferencing. A lot of these tools have been around for quite some time. Heck, email has been around for 20, 30 years almost by now. What are some of the tools that you've seen pop up over the past 12 to 24 months that you think are actually going to stick around and you're seeing businesses starting to adopt?
I think that it's interesting because for the last decade or so, the PC collaboration or mobile collaboration has been dominated by, from the corporate world, by Cisco's Jabber or Microsoft's Lync/Skype. Those do very well at providing voice, calling, IM, and presence. What we're seeing now, and some of this goes back to that open workspace, is that people are and the we instead of the I theory, is that people want to work in teams more. They want to work as a team. I think that's how a lot of the universities are starting to teach, that there are a lot of group lesson. The tools we're seeing are a little different than what we've had in the past. So we're talking about tools like Slack, tools like Cisco Spark, tools like HipChat.
Yeah.
These are the tools that provide a little different functionality than before. Now everything is persistent. So if I shared content with you, it's always there. I don't have to worry about if I didn't get the email or if I deleted the email. It's always in my application. And if I invite new people to this team, or new people get hired or teams change, all that content is there. I don't have to go tell them to go out to a portal, go find that information. It's all right there. It's all searchable. The key to that, though, is security. That is the key in regards to email has security functions that companies already take for granted. The new tools, though, that needs to be a focus.
Major concern.
I would just say that from a user point of view, there are a couple of things that we really do need help with from the technology point of view. One is help us interact informally. Help me see who's around, if you will. Help me bump into somebody. Technology as it exists today, or at least in the recent past, tends to be more of a channel to communicate back and forth rather than a venue in which I can find people. That's one thing. And I think the other thing is this notion of co-created generative type content, the prototypical whiteboard discussion.
Right.
It still seems inordinately hard to do that for distributed teams. And I think that's a place we could really use some help too.
Yeah, there are a number of tools out there that have recently come out that are providing that. They are now, in the past, they were separate applications. So it was something else a user had to use. We're finally getting to that point where it's all starting to integrate, and then we have development shops like Asynchrony who can actually provide integration into disparate applications. And I think that's really where the market is going in regards to taking those traditional physical collaboration spaces that you're talking about, whiteboards in general, and actually making them virtual.
Now, as we start talking about adding these new tools and as we go more open space where it's more around the wireless infrastructure, and now I'm accessing video from my desktop, from my mobile device, is there a concern on what that's going to do to the network?
One of the interesting aspects that we see right now is it's interesting. The budgets today for new buildings, or I should say for new collaboration tools, are not traditionally, they have been IT. They're not falling into that pattern anymore. They're falling into a facilities budget. And a lot of times facilities says, hey, I'm going to the open workspace. I'm not going to tie people to phones. I want to put soft phones on everybody's, so everybody will have a computer client for their phone. Well, that may work for that application. There's nothing wrong with that strategy, but there are a couple things that need to be taken into account. And that is the more soft clients or devices that are not plugged into the network are going to take wireless bandwidth. So wireless becomes what could be a huge speed bump to your adoption. You could think and come up with the best adoption plan to do this new technology, to open this new office, but if the network on the back end isn't going to support it, that's an issue. The other thing, and the other piece to that too is not just the wireless network, but if we're talking about soft clients, we're talking about more than likely headphones. And we just seen that Apple yesterday announced that they were getting rid of the headphone jack, which means more Bluetooth. Well, Bluetooth is a wireless technology. It's a density issue that needs to be taken into account. So all of these aspects need to be added on top of the furniture, the type of employee, the workflow, the types of spaces. These all need to be taken into account.
So for the sake of time, one of the other topics I want to make sure we got to today, and Dave Blatt, you started getting this earlier, is the concept of Agile. Typically, we think of Agile in the development world, but can you explain really quickly of what Agile is and how it can be applied outside of just developers?
Yeah, absolutely. It really is becoming kind of the new project management methodology as organization and service-based organization predominantly need to innovate faster, need to work through, ideate on problems and solve that. Tighter iterative cycles and more interaction between disciplines is going to produce a better result, including end users and customers. You know, its history came out of the 50s from Toyota, lean processing and manufacturing, and it's evolved through technology early in the 2000s as a better way, a better methodology to get quality and the right output. But now businesses are adopting it for innovation and more strategic initiatives. It values the interactions and individuals over processing tools. So if we can create through the modern workspace open environments to talk to each other and learn to each other, or use tools so that we can see each other and want to communicate, those are all aspects that support Agile. And then the nature of that methodology and process supports getting better output in less time, more efficient processes.
Perfect. Well, we're about at our time. I want to thank everyone for being on the panel today. As a next step, if anyone on the call today has any questions, how can they engage us? Brandon and Dave, what's the best way to engage you guys? Because I think each one of these topics we could definitely dive into quite a bit more. What's the best way to work with you guys to kind of take this a step further?
Well, I would say that the first thing to do would be go to the website, WWT.com. We have a number of documents on there that focus on the workshops that we put together. So we have a modern workspace or workspace productivity webinar. We also have a number of webinars that are workshops that go over what the tools of modern offices are. Also collaboration, which is best, which fits your workflows, how do we make those more efficient, and how do we utilize what you currently have to fit those goals.
And at our website, there are a lot of use cases that show the results of Agile practices played out and supported for innovation.
Yeah, I guess that'd be the easiest way from our point of view as well. Steelcase.com, pull down the research tab. We push research out pretty aggressively in a publication called 360. That's always there and indexed. It's also searchable along with white papers and whatnot. I'd also be willing to have anyone who wishes to reach out to me on the old technology of email. I'd be happy to respond to anything specific if they'd like. I think my email's up someplace.
Yeah, and that would go for us as well. The other thing too is we worldwide, along obviously with Steelcase, we have these types of environments all over our campuses, and I think I would like to open it up to anyone on the webinar that if you want to visit this type of space, please don't hesitate to ask. We really like to show off what we've put together, what we've been able to create.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing for Steelcase as well. And what you won't see, I think, is something that looks like it was crafted specifically for your needs. It'll be crafted more specifically for ours or WWT's needs. But there'll be some ideas there that may be useful for you. And I'd really encourage you to take some time and come visit a place where things are well thought through and choreographed together.
Perfect. Well, thanks, guys. What I want to do right now is open up to any Q&A that we have online. So I'm going to go back to Brian. Brian, do we have anything, any questions from the group today?
We do, Joe. The first question is, isn't this all just really real estate cost driven?
Yeah, I think I'll take a shot at that first. I think that's a very astute observation. When I started thinking about this a number of years ago, we had about twice as much square footage per person as we do today. And clearly companies have looked at that and said we really could reduce some of our net usage of real estate. And so there's absolute truth in what you're saying. I would also say that when you walk around most of our places today, it's still pretty common to find that the way we're doing it even now is oftentimes underutilized. And so there's a legitimacy in saying, is this waste or is this in fact a necessary resource? Layered over the top of that question that you asked, however, is a larger question of how is it that human beings actually create value when they work alone and together? What we need to be doing is addressing that within the financial constraints to come up with new solutions by engaging with the people of that firm so that the balancing of this I and we've been talking about is actually executed well. The only reason we have places, and in fact the only reason we have technologies, is to support the activities of humans that ultimately create value for our organizations. So while there is a truth in what you've said about the compression of real estate over time, there's also a need to say, regardless of how big the pot is, how do we help the organization use that and its technology correlate to create value for that organization?
I think you said it.
Yeah.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, that was good. Next question, Brian.
Next one is WWT a Steelcase distributor?
Answer that.
Yeah, we are not a Steelcase distributor. Each city, region has their own Steelcase distributor. Here in St. Louis, we use ColorArt. But on Steelcase's website, there is a partner or distributor locator. Please go there.
And kind of to piggyback that, part of the reason why we asked Steelcase to join us today is when we bring customers to our facilities and we talk about technology, we are always shocked about how many people say, hey, can I take pictures? And we say, okay, yeah, the video endpoints or whatever technology you're looking at, that's all publicly available. They ask to take pictures of the furniture, of the room design, because that's really the experience that customers are trying to get to is, how does this all come together to provide that exceptional experience, the feeling of being in the room, being productive, it's easy to use.
Right.
You know, when you have new hires walking in,
Comfortable.
they see it, it's comfortable. They're excited to be in that type of facility.
Yeah, the culture of an organization breathes when the people are together in the buildings. That's where it actually exists in a tangible way. And places that reflect the nature of the culture, as it clearly does here with you guys, are very, very helpful to creating productive engagements between people.
So it's the mix of the design, the technology, the layouts.
Yes,
When it
all of
all
that.
comes together,
Yeah.
it works well.
In fact, one thing that I'm seeing, just if I stand back and squint at it, is to an earlier point, is that the budgets for the technologies and the real estate are becoming more consistently one budget at the highest possible level so that money can move more organically. These are both just tools to support humans doing things. So if we can think of them as one tool or a set of slightly different tools in the toolbox and budget that way, we can drive these kinds of outcomes more successfully.
Great. Brian, anything else?
Yeah, our last question, Joe, is where can I go to see all of this in action?
So that was an easy question. So our website's got a lot of this content, both WWT.com as well as Steelcase.com. I believe you said the 360 on the Steelcase.
Under the research tab.
Under the research tab. It's got a lot of the information that Dave has been talking about today, as well as on WWT.com. We have a listing of all of our workshops, as well as, I believe, the archive of this meeting will be located there. So all that information is public facing, so please feel free to go out to any of our websites and you can download any of this content.
And we'd be happy to host you anytime you happen to be up in the Michigan area. Fall is a beautiful time to come to Michigan. Come on up and we'd be happy to spend some time with you at our shop in Grand Rapids.
Perfect. Brian, anything else? Well, I do appreciate everyone's time today. Like we said, we try to keep it to 37 minutes. We're just a tad bit over, but we appreciate everyone sticking with us today. As well, we want to thank our guest speaker from Steelcase, Dave. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was
Thanks,
a pleasure
Joe.
having you on the panel.
Thank
All
you.
right.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.